The world's most advanced nuclear-powered aircraft carrier.
We operate in international waters. We're sovereign U.S. territory, and we go wherever we may be needed.
Swarming with planes, weapons, and thousands of the Navy's best crew.
We have the best training in the world, so I like to think that we have the edge.
Life on this ultimate weapon is a thrill ride and an adrenaline rush. But one mistake could mean disaster.
I personally think it's probably one of the most dangerous places to work in the world.
Hurt in your stomach? You hurt anywhere else?
Come along for a behind-the-scenes look at the nuts and bolts of the U.S. Navy's newest supercarrier, the USS Ronald Reagan. It's the biggest single weapon in the American Armed Forces. In fact, no other Navy in the world has anything quite like it. It's also one of the most complex and technically advanced pieces of engineering on Earth. And we've got an all-access pass to the flight deck, the cockpit, even the captain's chair of the USS Ronald Reagan. We're about to discover the technology operating this supercarrier as a mobile combat airport and a floating home for more than 5,000 sailors. Like President Reagan himself, this supercarrier's motto is peace through strength. But this ship is more than strong. It's mobile. Unlike ground troops, a carrier can head anywhere in the world, quickly and easily, by sailing through international waters.
We can take this carrier strike group anywhere in the world that we want to, with only the permission of the President of the United States.
This massive marine monster is perfectly designed for one task: launch and land fighter jets anywhere in the world. The Reagan's current mission: prowl the waters of the Western Pacific Ocean near Korea. It's a demonstration of force, establishing American presence in a troubled area. It's no wonder adversaries show respect when this supercarrier shows up. It's got plenty of size, speed, and manpower. The USS Ronald Reagan is 1,096 feet long, nearly as long as the Empire State Building is tall. It towers 20 stories high. Fully loaded, it weighs 97,000 tons. And this ship is also a speedster, able to exceed 30 knots, or 35 miles per hour. The Reagan houses a crew of 5,000 to 6,000, commanded by Captain Terry Kraft.
I tell people I manage a nuclear power plant with an airport on top and 5,000 people squeezed in between. That's life on an aircraft carrier.
The USS Ronald Reagan is the newest and most advanced of 9 nuclear-powered Nimitz-class supercarriers, the largest warships in the world. And it's got a price tag to match: $4.5 billion.
Aircraft carriers are built for the long haul, so I really do think you get your money's worth out of an aircraft carrier. You know, the last commanding officer of USS Ronald Reagan has not been born yet. The ship's designed to last for 50 years.
Despite the billions of dollars of technology built into this supercarrier, the ship is still run by human hands. And the heart of the action is the flight deck crew, a team of 400 highly trained sailors. They have to remain focused and rely on well-honed procedures. This flight deck is filled with roaring jet engines, massive machinery, and dangerous weapons. Out here, a mistake could mean disaster.
because there's so many moving parts up on the flight deck and so many different things and variables. I personally think it's probably one of the most dangerous places to work in the world.
It's an enormous undertaking, running daily operations on this giant floating airport. To understand it all, we'll peel back the layers of technology and engineering that make the Regan the ultimate weapon. Priority 1 on this supercarrier: launch and land planes. There are 4 areas of the ship that take part in this operation: the hangar bay, the flight deck, primary flight control, and air traffic control. Launching a plane begins in the 82,000 square foot hangar bay, located 3 levels beneath the flight deck. Here, in this massive parking garage, engineering innovations like folding wings streamline each aircraft so the crew can fit them in the ship's limited space. Even the helicopters fold, right down to the rotors. When a plane is ready to launch, it's lifted to the flight deck on one of 4 massive hydraulic elevators. Each can carry 2 51,000-pound jets 60 feet up from the hangar bay in only 10 seconds.
5 Fox 1 is a yo-yo. Means he comes back, launches, and comes back on that same recovery.
The crew who manage the movement of planes is called flight deck control. They work from a small room in the ship's island. And the man in charge here, Lieutenant Derek Jensen, is called the handler.
My job here as the aircraft handling officer is to coordinate the movement of aircraft in support of flight operations, maintenance, fueling, and loading of ordnance, both on the flight deck and the hangar bay. It is very busy. If you can't talk on 3 phones, hold 2 conversations, and point at the same time, you're just not even qualified.
Despite the pressure, Flight Deck Control has a surprisingly low-tech tool for the job: the Ouija board.
This is the Ouija board, and it's simply a model of the flight deck and then down below the hangar bay. And a common question, why isn't it computerized? And quite honestly, they haven't come up with a program or computer that can keep up with the variables and the changing situation.
With the help of a live flight deck video feed, this crew keeps the Ouija board up to date in real time. Every single plane on board has a tiny replica. As a plane moves around the ship, the handlers move its replica. To keep track of each plane's status, they use pins, nuts, bolts, and washers as easy-to-remember symbols. Some examples: a red pin means the plane is on alert, ready to launch in minutes. A green pin, the plane is launching in the first event of the day. Or a nut, the plane is undergoing maintenance.
I always say it's pre-World War II technology here, and it's still the best thing going. This is the way we've done it for about 23 years I've been in the Navy.
Coming up, the controlled chaos that is the flight deck of the Navy's newest aircraft carrier. The USS Ronald Reagan is a mammoth weapon capable of delivering its powerful arsenal almost anywhere in the world. Its primary mission is to launch and retrieve fighter aircraft, and it all takes place on the flight deck. It's here that the planes get ready for flight in a scene of non-stop, high-intensity action. Strap on your helmet and get ready. Out here, it's a wild ride. The flight deck is 4.5 acres of spectacle and noise. 2 catapults on the bow and 2 on the portside angle deck launch planes into the air. On the stern, 3 strong cables, called arresting gear wires, stop planes dead in their tracks. Everywhere else, crew, fuel, and ammunition move around in a delicate ballet that's tightly choreographed. A mistake could cause an accident or injury.
Everybody's got to look out for each other on the flight deck. The flight deck is no kidding, the most dangerous place on the ship.
With planes constantly taking off and landing, timing and speed are everything. To make sure no one gets hurt, naval engineers created a rainbow system of colored shirts to identify crew members quickly. On the flight deck, your color indicates your role. Yellow shirts are aircraft handlers, directing the movement of each plane. Green shirts are equipment operators and maintenance personnel. They hook planes to the catapults and handle arresting gear wires. Brown shirts are plane captains. They manage planes when they're on the flight deck. Purple shirts, known as grapes, are technicians who refuel each aircraft. Red shirts handle all weapons and ammunition. Communication is key to this crew, but the roar of jet engines drowns out their voices, so they rely on hand signals to each other and the pilots. Taxi plane forward. Taxi to the right. Stop. And when the plane's ready to launch, fire the catapult. Looking down on the flight deck and keeping it all running smoothly is the carrier's primary flight control, called PriFly. They're the nerve center for air operations, located at the top of the 7-story high island.
On the flight deck, let's stand clear. Spot 6 while engaging rotors. 616, stand clear.
2 officers are in charge here, the air boss and the mini boss. Experienced naval aviators who give orders to direct all flight activity on the ship.
Need to hustle up on 614. It'll launch in 20 minutes.
Mini boss, Commander Tim McGarvey, kicks off a launch sequence. The good weather and great visibility is called Case 1.
On the flying deck, 10:15 launch. It's going to be a Case 1 launch, 59 degrees, altimeter 2994.
The Reagan's PriFly crew can launch and land planes over and over at a very fast rate. When launch operations are at full speed, a plane takes off the Reagan every 30 seconds.
404, airborne, Cap 4.
And when the landing sequence takes over, the crew can land a single plane every minute. It's a fast cycle, 2 to 3 times faster than on land. PriFly must monitor every single plane's launch and assure each plane comes back to the carrier for a safe landing. All this non-stop action could easily slip into chaos. Up in PriFly, job number 1 is to stay focused on flight operations.
You can't sleepwalk around here. It would be very bad, very dangerous.
To maintain control over all the action, the Navy depends on discipline, training, years of experience, and of course, loads of advanced technology. One important tool is the Integrated Ship Information System, or ISIS. It lists every active plane's number and pilot name, fuel state, and the nearest alternative landing sites, or divert fields. PriFly may be the ship's brain, but every successful mission depends on the Carrier Air Traffic Control Center, CATC, sitting below the flight deck and next to the island.
410 will be in 58. Roger, all 27 knots.
PriFly coordinates daytime flights in good weather, but CATC takes over when visibility is poor or at night, using radar to track planes in flight and radio communications to give them landing instructions. CATC's role is critical, helping pilots find their way back to the carrier.
500's coming out one fast, heading 230.
We got the scopes, the radars, and we're the other eye in the sky for the pilot. Get them all the way down on the deck, get them home safe.
Coming up, it's time to strap in for launch when these jet fighters catapult off the flight deck and into the skies. Flight operations on the USS Ronald Reagan require close cooperation between crew around the ship.
Let's get 501 pushed back. 3, you've got 404, 105, and 301. All the PCs should be standing by out there.
But when everything's ready and the planes are about to launch, the captain steps in. He orders the navigation crew to steer the ship into the wind. That extra wind over the flight deck gives the planes more lift during takeoff.
We don't have the longest runway in the world, and so when they take off and land, we got to help them out a little bit with getting some wind over their wings.
Now time for all personnel not involved flight operations. Leave the flight deck catwalk areas.
Then, the crew in primary flight control, Pri-Fly, takes over, and launch procedures begin.
Clear deck.
The key to the launch is this steam-driven catapult, the mechanism that propels the plane along the flight deck and into the air. The Reagan has 4 catapults. Each of the 300-foot-long catapults is made up of pistons inside 2 parallel cylinders, positioned directly under the deck. A moving shuttle is attached to the pistons, sitting within a groove, stretching the length of the runway. When the pilot and the plane are prepped and ready, they taxi into position. An equipment operator, or green shirt, guides the plane's front wheel, its nose gear, up to the catapult. A launch bar attaches the plane to the shuttle, and a holdback bar holds the plane in place until launch. The Reagan's nuclear reactors heat steam generators that fill the catapult's steam accumulators. These in turn fill the catapult cylinders with high-pressure steam. The catapult control pod, or bubble, is embedded in the flight deck. Inside, a catapult officer, also called the shooter, monitors the catapult steam pressure. The pressure must be adjusted for the plane's weight to shoot the catapult at the right speed. Too little pressure, and the plane won't make it into the air. Too much, the nose gear could rip right off. A jet blast deflector rises behind the aircraft just seconds from launch. Now, with only the holdback bar keeping the plane in place, the pilot guns the engines and braces himself for launch. A final salute, and the shooter hits the fire button. The holdback bar lets go as a surge of steam pressure catapults the plane forward. It's a rocket sled, launching a massive F-18 from 0 to 165 miles per hour in 2 seconds.
You're shot down there like being shot out of the end of a gun. You have very little control. You're pretty much along for the ride at that point.
Launching off this supercarrier can be risky and exhausting. But to this highly trained crew, it's just another day on the job. Carrier pilots know taking off can be a thrill ride, but landing is much riskier. Since carrier flight began, landing has always been a treacherous endeavor. A jet's approach may look normal until the last moment. Even today, it's one of the most difficult maneuvers a naval aviator will ever perform. They're traveling about 150 miles per hour as they come in for a landing. They've got to hook a wire on a runway about 800 feet long. And that runway is on a moving ship that tosses and rolls with the ocean. Sounds impossible, but the Navy has always made the impossible into everyday reality. Pilots like Lieutenant George DeGennaro, call sign Waldo, trained for years in flight school to learn how to land on a carrier.
You've been in flight school for about 2.5 to 3 years. Carrier qualification is the time when you have a lot of people at trite or wash out of flight school after all that work. So there is that stress element to it, and not to mention you're trying to land on a boat without killing yourself.
As the landing sequence begins, the pilot is in communication with the Landing Signal Officer, or LSO. LSOs are aviators not assigned to fly that day. Instead, they stand on the ship's stern and help their fellow pilots land. Wearing white flotation coats, the LSOs communicate with the pilot by radio to correct the flight path and watch the plane's approach on a monitor.
This is our platform display. So the guy is looking at this screen over here, and he's concerned about lineup, whether the jets are on center line or off to the right or left. If he's too far off, we'll have to wave him off.
Now, the pilot's focusing on one key instrument, a display of lights on the flight deck with a moving amber light called the meatball. It moves up and down to indicate the pilot's glide slope, or vertical angle of approach to the runway. If the plane is approaching the runway on the correct glide slope, 3.5 degrees above the flight deck, the meatball lines up perfectly between a row of green lights. If the plane's approach is too high or low, the LSO can activate a flashing red wave-off light, signaling the pilot to abort the landing and avoid a crash.
Crash on the flight deck is not a pretty thing. There's hundreds of people working up on the flight deck, billions of dollars worth of aircraft. One of them takes the wrong turn, that's the end.
The pilot stays on the glide slope during the 15 to 18-second approach. Then comes the landing itself, which relies on 3 2-inch steel and polycore cables called arresting gear wires, spaced 50 feet apart and stretched across the flight deck. The pilot has to catch a wire with a 5 to 7 foot long hooked metal bar called a tail hook. Each 3 wires are connected to hydraulic cylinders in the arresting gear engine rooms. Each wire is routed through a series of pulleys and connected to a piston inside a large fluid-filled cylinder. When the aircraft's tail hook snags one wire, the wire pulls the piston through the cylinder. And like a giant shock absorber, the cylinder's hydraulic fluid absorbs the tremendous energy of the moving aircraft, bringing the plane from 150 miles per hour to a complete stop in less than 2 seconds. Coming up, keeping the Regan ready for anything requires regular resupply. But for the crew, it's a high wire act at sea.
You gotta give it more. Whip it, pull it towards you.
When it comes to powering the supercarrier USS Ronald Reagan, the U.S. Navy spared no expense. Only the planet's most powerful energy source would do. Like all Nimitz-class carriers, the USS Ronald Reagan is powered by 2 nuclear reactors embedded deep in the ship. The reactors are highly classified and heavily protected.
It's built to go into war, so it's surrounded by lots of steel and then some more steel. It's much more rugged than a commercial shore-based power plant.
Inside the reactors, uranium atoms split apart in a controlled nuclear fission reaction that releases energy to heat pressurized water. The extremely hot liquid then passes through a heat exchanger, producing steam to drive a turbine, spinning a generator to produce the ship's power. The high-pressure steam also runs the catapults. and it powers giant turbines deep inside the ship, turning massive shafts and rotating 4 enormous bronze propellers. At the back of the ship, 2 huge rudders weighing 50 tons each handle the steering.
We have 2 reactors on board the ship. One reactor can pretty much do all the things we need to do on board this ship. So having 2 reactors provides us some redundancy and some flexibility.
The Regan's reactors and turbines also provide electricity to power the entire ship, from radar screens to the hangar bay doors to the aircraft elevators. Altogether, it's about 64 megawatts, enough electricity to supply a city of 100,000. And the reactors are designed to run for more than 20 years before replacing their uranium fuel. Yet keeping the deployed ship continually supplied with food, fuel, parts, and other critical items is another matter. This responsibility falls on the shoulders of the supply department.
Logistics is really the thing that makes our Navy really important and give us the ability to go over the horizon. I have $475 million worth of inventory of repair parts, and not only for the ship, but for the air wing as well. And that includes, pens and pencils, and it includes, radars.
About once a week, the crew performs a connected replenishment, or CONREP, bringing aboard new supplies, fuel, and fresh food from a Navy supply ship.
Yes, sir. We can run their 2 to our 5. It'll just fairly a little bit after. We can still run it, Captain.
To make the transfer, both the carrier and the supply ship must maintain a constant speed and an exact distance of 160 feet apart for 3 to 6 hours. Commander Eric Patton is the Regan's navigator.
We drive the ship more precisely than I drive my truck. It's tiring. Because you're focused for so long, there's some fatigue that does set in.
The carrier's crew begins the operation by shooting 4 pairs of lines across the 160-foot gap.
We shoot shot lines, which are just very small, thin lines of a nylon cord, and then we pull those cords over with bigger line, and then bigger line, and finally we pull over the big heavy wire.
Two CONREP stations are set up to handle fuel hoses, pumping up to 3.5 million gallons of JP5 jet fuel into the carrier's fuel tanks. 2 other stations handle food and supply pallets, using a pulley-operated gull wing crane to deliver them right into the Regan's hangar bay.
I'll bring upwards of 700 pallets sometimes worth of food and material.
The CONREP operation is inherently risky. If the ships stray off course, the wires could stretch and snap, recoiling like a deadly whip. Any loose clothing could catch on a wire and drag a crew member overboard.
And you did a good job whipping it, but you gotta give it more. Whip it, pull it towards you.
Understand Lake Champlain.
Deck Department Head, Lieutenant Commander Cleet Strasbaugh, and his safety crew watch the operation closely.
All the guys in the white hats are safety officers. Their primary job is to make sure that no safety violations take place. People don't get too close to the deck edge, temporary lifeline. They're not wearing any rings, watches, or any jewelry.
Finally, the supplies are on board and the CONREP's complete. Managing supplies is tough, but managing sailors is even tougher. It takes planning and hard work to keep daily life running smoothly on a ship this big.
We are a floating city. We have our own fire department. We have our own hospital. We have our own security, our own police department. So when you think of all those things and how much it would cost a city to run that type of an operation, that's really equivalent to how we are.
Feeding all of these hard-working sailors is Chef Monica Arias' top priority.
It's extremely important for the crew to be well fed. They're working 16, 20 hours a day up on the flight deck, so they're going to want to come down and have some good food. And food keeps you happy. You run on your stomach. And if you're hungry, how are you going to work?
23 hours a day, every day, the Reagan's 5 mess halls serve up 18,000 meals. From 11 dry storage rooms and 6 cold storage units, the Reagan's cooks create a tremendous feast. Daily, the Reagan bakes and serves 300 loaves of bread, nearly 2,500 fresh eggs, and more than 7,000 pounds of meat. When this crew cooks up a feast, they do it big. From hot dogs to fried shrimp to steak.
People's favorites would probably be like spaghetti. Spaghetti night is crazy. Or obviously steak. We have lines up to the hangar bay for steak, waiting forever just for a steak. So it's definitely our favorites.
It's quite obvious we're hungry.
Preparing lots of food also creates lots of trash, and there's no room to keep it all on board. But technology is on hand to help. In this machine, plastic is shredded, then melted and pressurized into giant discs called hockey pucks. They're stored in the hangar bay and then recycled on land.
We make about 100 of these in this plant alone every day. That's about 600 or 700 bags of plastic. That's a lot. Get a bag of cans. Cans are already in there.
Sailors drink 600,000 cans of soda every year. The metal is shredded to bits, then sent overboard.
Everything that we put over the side is biodegradable. Saltwater just eats it up.
Life on the USS Ronald Reagan is dominated by one thing: the ship's layout. Moving around inside this multi-level maze is complicated, confusing, and often exhausting. Cross-sectional maps of the ship are posted in passageways to help the crew find their way around. But if you stop paying attention to where you're walking, you risk injury. Watertight doorways and strengthening frames line the passageways through the ship. Each of them has a circular opening that's smaller than the passageway itself. Duck, or you'll smack your skull. And make sure to step high, or the hatch's bottom lip, or knee knocker, will smash your shins. It's the reality of life on this supercarrier. Coming up, an inside look at the F-18 Hornets on board the USS Ronald Reagan and the powerful ordnance they carry. The supercarrier USS Ronald Reagan. It's a mobile combat airport with dozens of highly trained pilots flying the Navy's most versatile strike fighter, the F-18. These powerful planes require explosive weaponry to complete their missions. So the Reagan is packed to the gills with 10 million pounds of ordnance. On board the carrier, the Air Wing includes 7 squadrons of more than 60 planes and nearly 2,000 sailors. Most crew are in support roles. Only 100 are pilots, separated into tightly knit squadrons of 10 to 15.
Typical pilot in the Air Wing who flies these F-18s, for example, it's going to be a lieutenant, mid to late 20s, maybe 30 years old.
We're launching aircraft, catapults 2, 3, and 4. Stand well clear. Shoot 'em up.
The F-18 Hornet is the heart of the Air Wing. It's the Navy's top strike fighter aircraft, thanks to its reliability and performance during combat. The F-18 is a versatile aircraft. It can easily switch between attacking targets on the ground and targets in the air.
If you're going in to attack a target and you have to defend yourself against enemy aircraft on the way in and on the way out from that target, the Hornet can do that, and it's an extremely pilot-friendly aircraft to fly.
The Reagan's Air Wing has 4 squadrons of F-18 jets, almost 50 planes in all.
Their primary function here is overland strike projection. That's really what the carrier is all about, being able to project force across the horizon.
The Reagan has 2 F-18 models, the $29 million Hornet, and the latest version, the $54 million Super Hornet. Measuring 60 feet 4 inches long with a wingspan of 44 feet 11 inches, the Super Hornet has a top speed surpassing Mach 1.8. More than 1,300 miles per hour. With that kind of speed at their disposal, these planes can create a sonic boom as they easily fly past the sound barrier. The F-18 Super Hornet carries up to 11 pieces of ordnance on every flight, attached to hooks on the wings or body of the plane. Some weapons are guided by GPS, radar, or heat-seeking infrared, like the Sidewinder missile. Others are simply dumb bombs, heavy, unguided explosives weighing between 500 and 2,000 pounds. And then there's the Hornet's powerful gun, a 20-millimeter cannon that shoots 6,000 rounds per minute. Every piece of the ship's ordnance is kept in one of 34 storage units, called magazines. Flight preparation begins in a well-protected assembly room deep inside the carrier, 5 decks below the waterline. Here, unarmed weapons are assembled for combat by a well-trained crew of ordnance handlers, known as the G3 Division.
They're trained as a cohesive unit, and through that training, that's how we become more proficient in handling weapons.
The crew is preparing a 500-pound Mark 80 series unguided dumb bomb. On the bomb's back end, an aerodynamic fin is attached. It'll help the bomb fly more accurately to its target. At the same time, a nose plug is installed on the front end to give the bomb greater target penetration. The crew adds a safety switch and inspects the bomb. A pneumatic hoist moves it from the assembly table to a skid for transport to the flight deck. This well-trained crew is efficient, completing the ordnance assembly in about a minute. One of the ship's 9 ordnance elevators brings the bomb to a staging area, or bomb farm, located on the flight deck's starboard side.
Inspect lugs and fin for alignment and security.
After one last inspection, the G3s hand custody of the bomb to the squadron's own ordnance crew. They'll load the weapon onto an F-18. There's no room on the flight deck for pneumatic hoists, so this 6-person team must lift the bomb by hand and carefully lock it into place on the F-18's wing. For leverage, they use metal poles, nicknamed hernia bars.
Bring it up! Forward! Forward, straight up! Left forward! Lock down, take it! Hook support weapons, weight braces in and inboard! Up forward!
Finally, the bomb is safely locked and tightened into place. At this stage, with the dumb bomb tightly attached to the plane, the crew can arm it for combat with an exploding fuse. Flying a daytime mission requires concentration and focus. But when the sun goes down, pilots face the most challenging aspect of naval aviation: night flight.
It It's something that a lot of people never really get used to. I don't think the Wright brothers would have invented an airplane if they had flying at night in mind, especially off of an aircraft carrier. It's not something that's necessarily fun, but it will get your heart beating.
Many combat missions are flown under cover of darkness, so aviators must also train this way. Yet at night, no horizon is visible, and pilots can easily lose a sense of their surrounding space.
On an exceptionally dark night, which we'll have when there's no moon or when there's weather above us blocking out the moon and the stars, it can be very disorienting.
During a landing, pilots shift their focus to the flight deck's meatball to guide them in. Yet they often don't realize how close they are to the carrier. And the touchdown can be a jarring surprise.
It can go south very quickly when you're landing on the carrier at night. You just revert to your training and don't think about it. If you think about it, you're going to be dead.
If a pilot's glide slope is incorrect by even a small margin, he could strike the back of the carrier, as this F-18 did on the Reagan in January 2006. The pilot ejected safely, but the plane was lost in the ocean. Still, despite the ever-present danger, these naval aviators are well-trained, and they rely on their years of experience to fly and land safely.
You gotta kind of stay relaxed and stay focused on what you're doing and not think too hard about what you're gonna do.
When the last aircraft mission has been flown, the USS Ronald Reagan heads for home. These sailors have been at sea for more than 3 months, and they're ready for the deployment to end.
How's your family doing?
Good, sir.
Good?
Good. The boys are getting big.
How old are they?
They'll be 3 in August, sir.
Yeah. We have been underway a lot. The hard part about that you just can't get around, it's hard on the families. So we're looking forward to getting home.
The ship sails back toward its home port in San Diego, California. But first, it makes an important stop at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. To honor American sailors lost here during World War II, the Reagan's crew mans the rails for close to 2 hours, including a 15-minute salute to the USS Arizona Memorial. Five days after the stop in Hawaii, the USS Ronald Reagan sails into its home port in San Diego. On shore, families wait patiently for the crew to return, with flags and homemade signs. The long months apart make the homecoming an emotional experience. According to Navy tradition, sailors who've become new fathers during deployment are the first on shore. It's a powerful experience as they meet their newborn children for the first time. They've called this ship home for months. Now they disembark, returning to their family's embrace. This supercarrier's mission is complete. But it won't be long before the USS Ronald Reagan, the world's largest mobile combat airport, is back out at sea. And when it's prowling the oceans, adversaries will have to take notice of this ultimate weapon. For years to come, this supercarrier will send a message to the world, the same message delivered by the president whose name it carries. Peace through strength.